2017. Tottenham Hotspur end the year in sensational fashion. Most goals, least goals conceded, Golden Boot winning striker, young player of the year, and yet, second place. Now, they did lose out to one of the most complete sides in the history of the league and kept them honest through to the end. But, unfortunately, there are no prizes for keeping up the pressure. Unfortunately for Spurs, this somber sentiment has rang true more often than not, but nowhere was it more prevalent than it was under Mauricio Pochettino. The man who, for better and worse, between 2015 and 2019, turned Tottenham Hotspur into quite possibly the greatest team to win nothing. It's a sensational claim, I'm well aware, but it's one worth contemplating. Under Poch, Spurs blossomed into a thrilling, dynamic force. This was a team built on a foundation of young, hungry talent. Harry Kane's ruthless goalscoring, Dele Alli's flair, Christian Eriksen's creativity, Moussa Dembele's elegance, one of those guys that everybody claims is underrated yet is still somehow underrated. Despite frequently making the finals and semi-finals of the biggest cup competitions, still, nothing whatsoever. Because of all of this, it feels like as good a time as ever to investigate just how good this team actually was. Hello all, welcome back. I've done a deep dive on Tottenham Hotspur in the past, which will be linked in the description. Where this current video differs is, as per the title, I want to pay more attention to the characters and stories from this Poch era specifically. Without further ado, we start this video off with some financial advice. Gareth Bale.
And he makes it turn! It's a brilliant finish! Gareth Bale!
Unbelievable generational player. From the early days, it was well known that he would go on to achieve incredible things, but the levels that he reached in a Spurs shirt were just remarkable. Spurs as a club were on the rise in the late 2000s. Once a mid-table side, they were slowly climbing up the ranks to become a consistent top 6 side. The team was filled with great characters in Kyle Walker, Luka Modric, Jermaine Defoe, and many more. And Harry Redknapp was getting some fantastic use out of Nico Cruncher.
Nico's a top-class player as well, real good footballer. I'm going to start a Sunday morning team. Oh, yeah. And I'm going to
Is your first signing?
I'm going to get him in. Yeah. By the way, he was a good player.
But Bale was undoubtedly the crown jewel. By 12-13, the world was well aware of just how powerful he really was. 26 goals and 10 assists in 44 games as a winger and the winner of every single individual award of the season. And then he left. Real Madrid, 100 million euros. He was never saying no to that. Obviously not an ideal situation for Spurs, but I think that no Spurs fan would disagree that the team got some significant value from him in his final year. At this point, Spurs finished the year with their highest points total ever, 72, only missing out on Champions League qualification by 1 point. And the team that beat them to it was, of course, Arsenal. Disappointing, but all of this was still cause to believe that better days were just around the corner. So, you've just lost your star man, got a big bag of dosh, and are looking to push on to new heights. What's the most logical thing to do? What's that? Spunk the majority on players that will come nowhere near establishing an ROI? Eriksen was definitely worth it, especially for £11.5 million, absolute deal. Eric Lamela was also, quite decent in streaks, but definitely not worth £30 million. Andre Villas-Boas, who had a very respectable year in the previous campaign and the Bale season, was coming under fire. The results were not going his way, and after a 5-0 thrashing against Liverpool, his time was up. 9th place in the league at one point. So Timmy Sherwood replaced Villas-Boas and was even given an 18-month contract. He was sacked 6 months later. Potential. Tottenham Hotspur have always had potential. Spurs won a League Cup in 2008, beating Arsenal and Chelsea on their way to doing so. They did this despite finishing 11th in the league that season. And when results began to improve, they just couldn't seem to break through beyond the spots reserved for the traditional top sides, and even had to sell their best shot in years of doing so. Still, there was something about Spurs, wasn't there? Could anyone, anywhere, anyhow, bring it out? Mauricio Pochettino is an interesting character. Just based on the way he presents himself, there are times when he seems to cut a friendly, unassuming character, There are others where he gives off the persona of a volcano waiting to erupt. His rise to the top was not left up to chance. It was methodical. A former player, of course, with a playing career that took him from Argentina to Spain to France and then back to Spain. Primarily a centre-back, his playing career spanned 17 years, a success by almost every metric. 34 years old in 2006, now retired, like every other athlete that's only done one thing for their entire life and then reaches the ripe old age of mid-30s, he had to find something to do with his time. So he decided to put his mind to work and go back to school, pursuing a master's degree in sports management. He decided to do so after a discussion with an economics professor at the University of Barcelona, coincidentally, a friend of his. As per Poch's own words, it was here that he truly matured and began seeing life differently. I made a lot of friends with people from all around the world who were studying there. They asked me what I was doing there, and I said I needed them more than ever because I needed to be normal people. Because I needed them to be normal people. By early 2009, he was ready to get back into the thick of it. Espanyol was the club that he started his European adventure with and the club that he retired at. Halfway through the 08-09 season, they were in a crisis. Already 2 managers having been sacked and in 18th place in the league standings. Pochettino had only just completed his UEFA Pro license in December 2008, but they needed his help and threw out the Poch signal. He answered the call and joined the club as manager. His first match in charge? An easy one to get the ball rolling. A Copa del Rey quarterfinal versus a Pep Guardiola managed, Lionel Messi laden Barcelona on their way to completing a treble, a Catalan derby. Everyone thought that Espanyol and Poch stood no chance. However, unexpectedly, the game ended in a draw. 1 game in, and he was already showing why he would prove to have real staying power in this industry. Barcelona won in the second leg, but the first leg of that quarterfinal undoubtedly awakened something in this previously struggling side. Against the odds, Poch kept Espanyol afloat, not just surviving, but doing so with a distinct identity, a high-pressing, energetic style that would become his trademark. He stayed on at Espanyol for a further 3 years, and this is where he laid the seed for his now famous reputation of being a pro-youth manager. Pochettino took a keen interest in the tactical styles and developments at every level of the club, regularly holding meetings with youth coaches, attending training sessions, and promoting academy graduates. Sadly, by the end, Espanyol's form began to dip and slowly, Poch began to fall out of favor with the board, even publicly complaining about the club's lack of backing in the market. He left by mutual consent in November of 2012, and then he caught the eye of England. Southampton. For the second time, he joined a team in January. For the second time, a team that was in a bit of a crisis. Recently arrived in the Premier League after 2 back-to-back promotions, it would be easy to assume they were about to go right back down, and it actually did seem that way initially. 1 win in the first 11 games, solidly relegation candidates. This form is what eventually got previous manager Nigel Adkins the sack. Something needed to be done to stop the bleeding. Now, Pochettino's arrival at Southampton in 2013 was met with skepticism once again, and once again, understandably. He spoke very limited English, but it seems as though the language barrier wasn't too big of a deal because he very quickly silenced those critics.
You come in and did something completely different that we hadn't seen. I mean, this graphic, you're number 1 in terms of distance per game, we see that. But the big thing for me is how far you're number 1.
Pochettino's Saints side played with aggression and flair, beating Chelsea, Liverpool, and Manchester City. 14th place is not bad at all for a half-season job. 8th place the next year. Espanyol were a club with potential, but were capable of more. Poch changed that. Southampton were a club with potential, but were capable of more. Poch changed that. Potential is a funny thing. It's also something that has closely been associated with Tottenham Hotspur, which also happened to be where he was headed next. Pochettino's tenure began with a clear intent to redefine Tottenham's playing style. He introduced an intense pressing system demanding high energy and commitment from his players. The approach required not only physical endurance but also mental fortitude as the team sought to dominate possession and dictate the tempo of matches. Central to this transformation, on theme with the video, was Pochettino's faith in youth. A 21-year-old Harry Kane was being pushed from loan spell to loan spell as seemingly nobody believed he was ready. Perhaps this wasn't far from the truth. However, when his opportunity came, he proved he was made of the right stuff. Kane was emblematic of the changes that came to White Hart Lane, going from 4 goals in 1 year to 31 goals the next. Further incoming players were Ben Davies, Eric Dyer, and Dele Alli in the winter window. Midfielders Ryan Mason and Nabil Bentaleb also emerged as key contributors, both being academy graduates. A League Cup final was reached too, but Chelsea got their revenge from the 07-08 final, picking up a 2-0 win. Nevertheless, the year ended in 5th place with 64 points. And there was indeed criticism over Poch's playstyle, as there always is when a manager comes in from the outside and doesn't immediately work magic. And if we're all being completely honest, many of those complaints were warranted. Defensive frailties were evident, with the team conceding 53 goals, ranking 14th in the league in terms of defense. Some, in fact many, believe that Kane's heroics were an isolated anomaly. He was not expected to carry his wild goal-scoring form into the future, and therefore Spurs' perceived over-reliance on his goal-scoring form was in need of balancing out. Kane really is the world's first ever 11-season wonder. The first season was a blend of optimism and realism. The boys got right to work in improving their odds. Kieran Trippier, Toby Alderweireld, and Son Heung-min transferred in the following year, and Spurs were now a proper side. This is how things lined up in the 2015-16 season. The defense was set with Toby Alderweireld and Jan Vertonghen anchoring, with Hugo Lloris in brilliant form. It was Dele Alli's first Premier League season and season with Spurs, of course, and he flourished. Still only 19 years old when the year started. Kyle Walker's pace was of course too much to deal with. Christian Eriksen was in the form of his life. Moussa Dembele was incredibly sturdy. Harry Kane of course was phenomenal. This was notoriously a season where every big side suffered a remarkable drop-off, all in unison, paving the way for a less traditional title race. Initially, Spurs were actually in the same boat as the bigger teams, a loss and 3 straight draws to start the year, but things picked up very quickly from then on as points began to accumulate. A 4-1 and 2-1 double was done on Manchester City, as is tradition. They had the best defense in the league, conceding 35 and scoring 69, more than anyone bar City. And then, at one point, all of a sudden, come match day 27, the great Tottenham Hotspur was 2 points off the top with a game in hand to Leicester City, a team that was recently promoted and even more recently battling relegation. 2 years after getting back into the Premier League, they were flying. But nobody expected them to actually pull it off, and in a year where all the big teams were struggling, Spurs were perfectly positioned to make history.
Premier League champions 2016, Leicester City!
You know, in a sense, Spurs did make history by becoming the first team to come third in a 2-horse race. They finished a point behind second place Arsenal. Tough. Everything was set up so nicely for them, only to draw and lose every significant match for the remainder of the year. They were knocked out early in every cup competition, meaning for all the hype, Spurs had nothing to show for it. The game that put the final nail in the coffin was a 2-2 draw to the worst Chelsea side in decades. Eden Hazard remembered how to play football again just to spite them. And to make matters even worse for Spurs, they got even better the following year, substantially actually, scoring almost 20 more goals and conceding almost 10 less, second to none in those categories. This was, to me at least, and remains the best Spurs side we have ever seen in the Premier League era. But, you know, the big boys woke up from the fairy dust that Leicester was putting in the air. And just so we're all familiar with the numbers, Leicester City won the Premier League with 81 points. 81. That tally would only be enough to win 6 of all seasons that have been played. Spurs went on to earn 86 points the next year. Chelsea put up 93. Eden Hazard, Player of the Year. Tough. From then on, we witnessed the rise of City and Liverpool's duopoly, and Spurs sank deeper and deeper. They missed their window of opportunity, it seems. The reliance on Kane and Son's magic grew larger and larger too. In 17-18, the pair scored or assisted 50 of Spurs' 74 EPL goals. It was also the same season that Juventus knocked Spurs out of the Champions League in the round of 16, even though Spurs were the more dangerous side over the course of the tie. A packed-out crowd at Wembley witnessed this as Spurs were in the middle of a stadium transition. On the very same night, Giorgio Chiellini said a few very famous words that we likely will never stop hearing until the end of time.
Yeah, but Tottenham, it's the history of the Tottenham. They always created many chances and scored so much, but at the end they miss always something to arrive at the end. We believe in the history.
Tottenham Hotspur memes were rapidly on the rise in 2018. You couldn't escape them.
Have you like football, yeah?
Yeah.
The Premiership?
Yes.
The Premiership?
Yeah.
What Premiership teams do you know?
Man United,
Yeah.
Chelsea,
Yeah.
West Ham,
West Ham?
Liverpool,
No, yeah.
Man City.
Do you know Tottenham?
What?
Tottenham Hotspur?
Hotspur?
No.
What's that?
You never heard of them?
No?
Spurs were an all-action team. This can lead to burnout, so in a period where the team really needed to add personnel to stay fresh and competitive, in 18-19, Daniel Levy decided to take action and sign no one. A self-imposed transfer ban, it seems. Now, he says that this was because he had expected people to leave and was going to make signings based on those outgoings. There was also the case of them constructing the most expensive stadium in the world at the time. And you know what? If we're all being completely real, the fact that Spurs stayed competitive throughout this period and even rose above their previous standards despite all of those things that were going on around them is quite remarkable. All the same, football is a funny thing. Most were of the opinion that Spurs were never going to get another opportunity to win silverware after missing their golden chance. Even still, that very same season, in 18-19, the team came agonizingly close to picking up the biggest trophy of them all. They battled their way through a UCL group of death, including Barcelona, Inter Milan, and PSV, somehow making it through on the final match day with a draw to Barcelona. Genuinely, everyone had written them off for qualification to the next round, and they continued to do so, only for Spurs to keep advancing. First was Borussia Dortmund, back-to-back wins over both legs. Next was Manchester City, arguably the best version of Pep Guardiola's City to date. They became the only team to put up 100 points in a league season the year before and would go on to win 98 points in the current one, as well as win every single domestic trophy, which is why it makes perfect sense that Spurs won this tie on goal difference. Heung-min Son has never liked Man City. And when you thought the drama couldn't get any more tantalizing, they did what seemed like the impossible in the semi-finals. Lost at home to the best Ajax in decades, and then 2-0 down by the end of the first half away in the reverse leg, 3-0 on aggregate. Erik ten Hag was not about to let a lead like this slip. Lucas Moura, however, had other ideas. He scored a second-half hat-trick to completely flip the tie on its head and have Spurs advance on away goals. Combined with Barcelona's unbelievable collapse literally the day before this, these were, in my lifetime at the very least, the most exciting Champions League semi-final rounds to witness. There was really ever only going to be one winner. Liverpool cruised to a 2-0 lead in the final and made it number 6. Golden period over. No gold. In a year where Spurs were expected to not achieve much, they ended up subverting their expectations. After all was said and done, they did also finish in 4th, so would be right back in the Champions League. Yes, they had lost the step, but all was definitely not lost. With some good signings, Levy could put Spurs right back on the map. Okay. They still had Pochettino and... Sacked only 12 games into the 19-20 season, with Spurs in 14th place. Truly an end of an era. You do have to feel sorry for Mauricio Pochettino. He was truly the X factor that made Spurs competitive and drove them to new heights, heights they enjoy to this day. As I said, many of the players that turned into world beaters under him were either untrusted, unproven, or unknown before he arrived. And while it's easy to make videos like this where we look back at factors such as his football upbringing, his track record for youth, and more, and claim it was easy to see this coming, the reality is that this was unexpected. So let's leave the memes aside and look at it for what it is. This was a great side, truly capable of the spectacular, capable of disrupting the status quo, and potentially the greatest Premier League team to never win anything.